So warm welcome to all of you. So today we are going to look at the subsection of the part 4, the Buddhist way of life. And today we are going to look at the subsection 6, which is titled as on self and self-conquest. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read it through and then going to gloss over some of the verses that have been included here. So on self and self-conquest. 1. If one has self, let him practice self-conquest. This is the Buddhist way of life. Self is the lord of self. Who else could be the lord? With self well subdued, a man finds a lord such as few can find. The foolish man who scorns the rule of the venerable Arhat, of the elect Arya, of the virtuous and follows a false doctrine, he bears fruit of his own destruction, like the fruits of the Kattaka reed. By oneself, the evil is done. By oneself, one suffers. By oneself, evil is left undone. By oneself, one is purified. The pure and the impure stand and fall by themselves. No one can purify another. 6. He who loves looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, immoderate in his food, idle and weak, will certainly be overthrown by his own overdoing as the wind throws down a weak tree. 7. He who lives without looking for pleasures, his senses well controlled, moderate in his food, faithful and strong, he will not be overthrown any more than the wind throws down a rocky mountain. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. First establish thyself in the right, then thou mayst counsel others. Let not the wise man give occasion for it. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. If one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, thus well controlled one will have control over others. A man pays in himself for the evil he has done, and in himself is purified. The good and evil are purified severely. No one purifies another. 12. Though one should conquer in battle thousands and thousands of men, whoso shall conquer himself, he is the greatest of warriors. 13. First establish thyself in the right, then thou may counsel others. Let not the wise man give occasion for reproach. Oneself shapes oneself according as one counsels others, thus well controlled, one will have control over others. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. Verily, oneself is the guardian of oneself. What other guardian should there be? By oneself, one gets a guardian, the like of which is not likely gotten. 6. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. A man pays in himself for the evil he has done, and in himself is purified. The good and evil are purified severely. No one purifies another. Verily, oneself is the guardian of oneself. What other guardian should there be? Guarded by oneself, one gets a guardian, the like of which is not gotten. So as we can see these verses, and it's very clear from these verses that it's based on the self and self-conquest. Now it's little bit puzzling, because when we talk about Buddhism, the Buddha has talked about anatta, and here the word is coming again and again, that is atta. So what is self, and how do we understand self in Buddhism? So the Buddha, of course, denied the existence of eternal, perpetual, impermanent, permanent self, because there is nothing in our existence that we can find permanent. There is nothing in our existence which can be said to continue after we die in terms of the soul. So Buddha has found in his own experiences that there is nothing called soul. There is nothing permanent, or there is nothing which inherently exists. And therefore this title on self and self-conquest acquires a very different meaning altogether when we talk about the self and the self-conquest. But as we see in our day-to-day life, in our languages and the way our minds operate, we have a very strong sense of self. We have a very strong sense of continuity of something which we think we are born with and which we are going to live till our death. So that sense of self is always there. And psychologically, we know that without that particular amount of ego or particular amount of self, we cannot really operate in the world. And yeah, as the famous question, the first question in the million prashna goes, is about the self. And after the discussion, the Naksen, the Bante Naksen convinces Milind that there is only the name of chariot. But if we disintegrate the chariot, if we divide the chariot, we cannot find anything called chariot inside. It is just a name given to the compound of several things. Likewise, the names that we have, the kind of nouns we use, they are the linguistic shorthands to refer to something in our day-to-day lives. But if we try to find out what is within, we cannot really find out, because there is nothing inherently permanenting in anything. So this heading on self and self-conquest acquires a meaning in terms of our psychological self. It is not the soul, it is a psychological self that we are talking about. And therefore I think it's very, very important for us to understand it in that way. So the verse number 1, if one has self, let him practice self-conquest. So you see, when we cherish so much of ourself, our whole lives are centered on what is called the feeling of sense, and everything is based on me, myself, and mine. Ahang, mama. uh, these feelings are all the time there, because we are all the time, the referential frame of the entire experiences that we have is based on or grounded in the feeling of I, me, and mine. So these three things: ahankar, mamamkar, and something belonging to me. So you see, if we have a self, then we have to practice self-conquest, because it's very hard to conquer our ego. It's not easy to conquer our ego. And our ego is so strong that it finds whatever it touches, it colors itself with the ego that we have. So if we look at the world around us, whatever we experience the world around us, it is all colored by our ego, by our sense of self, by our sense of something belonging to me, by the sense that something belongs to something as mine. So you see, whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we smell, the reference point is me, and then mine, and not mine. And therefore, this is very, very important, that if we have a sense of self or an ego, and therefore we have to practice what is called the self-conquest. So if we have an ego, if we have to use the modern parlance, if we have an ego, then let's practice how we can control our ego, isn't it? Because we have seen that in the world so many things occur because of ego, ego issues, because something we some view we cherish as the truth. And because if we find somebody having those views contradictory to our own views, then there is a potential source of conflict. And all the conflict in the world, they are grounded in the sense of in the sense of self. And the extended form of self is an identity. And we all know that how the identities come into, isn't it? The identity of the caste, the identity of the nation, the identity of language, and in the case of India, the identity of the caste, isn't it? They are all grounded in the sense of ego, the sense of me, the sense of mine, and sense of belonging to me. So you see, if we have self, then we have to practice self-conquest. And it's not easy. The Buddha says it's not easy. to conquer the self. Now, self is the Lord of self. One, who else could be the Lord? So, attai attano natho. This is what goes in the Pali. So if we have a sense, the Lord of it is the self itself, isn't it? So we are the Lord unto ourselves. Who else could be the Lord? Isn't it? With self well subdued, a man finds a Lord such as few can find. Now you see, if we can control ourself, if our self is conquered, if we know how to manage our self, if we know how to manage, subdue our ego, then we know who is the Lord. We can take control of everything, and it's not easy for all to do it. It's very difficult path to have a self-control or the self-conquest. So the verse number 3, self is the Lord of self. Who else could be the Lord? With self well subdued, a man finds a Lord such as few can find. The verse number 4, the foolish man who scorns the rule of the venerable, of the elect, of the virtuous, and follows a false doctrine, he bears fruit to his own destruction, like the fruits of the Kathaka reed. It's like iron which is rusted. So the iron is destroyed by its own rust, isn't it? Likewise, the foolish man who scorns the rule of the venerable, of the elect, of the virtuous, and follows a false doctrine, he bears fruit of his own destruction, like the fruits of the Kathaka reed. You see, the conditions for our own destructions are created by our own self. And if we change the conditions, we cannot be destroyed, isn't it? So by our own deeds, we are destroyed. That is what is the meaning here. So whatever we do, the way we act, the way we speak, that forms the, conditions for our destruction. So if we follow a false doctrine or a false teaching, then our destruction is assured, just like the fruits of the Kathaka reed, just like the rust destroys the iron. So the verse number 5, by oneself the evil is done. So the evil is not done by other. So we do the evil. By oneself the evil is done. By oneself one suffers. And we suffer because of our own deeds. By oneself evil is left undone. By oneself one is purified. So you see, the whole responsibility falls on our own selves as to how we control our egos, how we control ourselves, how we control our possessive nature, how we control our foolish being, isn't it? So it's not done by something else. It's not done by God. It's not done by others. The evil, by oneself, the evil is done. By oneself, one suffers. By oneself, evil is left undone. By oneself, one is purified. The pure and the impure, by themselves, no one can purify another. Isn't it? So you see, this is very important, that whatever feelings we have, whether we suffer or whether we are happy, it has nothing to do with the outside world. It has nothing to do with the sun. It has nothing to do with the moon. It has nothing to do with the seasons. It has to do solely with our own being, with our own minds. Isn't it? Nobody is responsible for our suffering. It's an attitude as to how we look at what is happening to us. So for example, when we suffer, we feel painful. So the Buddha says that, be watchful of the painful sensations, isn't it? So when we watch the painful sensations, we begin to know that the painful sensations are mind-made. And because they are mind-made, if we have a forbearance, if we can patiently, observe them, they come and go, isn't it? Just like physical sensations, sometimes we have very painful physical sensations. And when we have painful physical sensations, we add the mental, painful sensations. So Buddha says, if an arrow is darted at a being, at a man, and he is hurt, then if you dart a second arrow, the person is more hurt. The second arrow is equated with the mental anguish. Because we have a body, we are going to have some kind of a painful experience because of the body. And when we suffer, if our body is painful, our minds are longing for the sensuality, and in that we create more suffering. So you see, what the Buddha is trying to tell us here in the verse number 5, that no one outside is responsible for how we feel. No one outside is responsible for how we feel, whether we feel pleasure or we feel pain. It's altogether, we are responsible for it. That means the Buddha is asking us to take the responsibility of what we feel and make amends to our own minds. And I think this is very significant, because if you look at the other religions or other philosophies or ideologies, most of the times the blame is placed on the God or fate or karma and so on and so forth, isn't it? But the Buddha is very clear here in the verse number 5 when he says, by oneself the evil is done, by oneself one suffers, by oneself evil is left undone, by oneself one is purified, the pure and the impure stand and fall by themselves. No one can purify another. So you see, if we want to purify other human beings, we cannot do it. They have to purify themselves. That's why it's spoken about the Buddha, that the Buddha is the Margadata. Buddha is not the Mokshadata. And it's a very significant statement, that Buddha can teach us the Dhamma, the way towards Nibbana. But Buddha cannot attain Nibbana for us. We have to attain the Nibbana for our own selves. We have to really strive hard by ourselves to attain to the Nibbana. And I think this makes it clear that the Buddhism is a path of a responsibility. The onus lies on our shoulder. We cannot blame others. We cannot blame the Buddha. We cannot blame, the so-called God for whatever, we go through, isn't it? So I think this is very, very significant. This paragraph, this verse number 5, by oneself the evil is done, by oneself one suffers, by oneself evil is left undone, by oneself one is purified, the pure and the impure stand and fall by themselves, no one can purify another. And the verse number 6 goes like this: he who lives looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, Okay, so you see this sentence, that he who lives, there is a spelling mistake, he who lives looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, immoderate in his food, idle and weak, will certainly be overthrown by his own overdoing, as the wind throws down a weak tree. There is a very beautiful gatha in the Dhammapad about how the weak tree is uprooted by the wind. Just like that, if our minds are shallow, if our minds are looking for pleasures only, and if our 5 senses are uncontrolled, and we are immoderate in our food, and we are idle and weak, will certainly be overthrown by his own overdoing, as the wind throws down a weak tree. Very clear. And very, very important here is to understand this verse number 6, that if we continue to live only for the pleasures, all the time our minds are running around after the pleasures here and there all the time, uncontrolled senses, and our senses are uncontrolled, our senses are unguarded, there is no mindfulness, there is no watchfulness, there is no striving to cultivate something good, then what happens is we will be overthrown by our own overdoing, as the wind throws down a weak tree. So very systematically laid out teachings, as we can see here in this subsection 6. The verse number 7 goes like this: he who lives without looking for pleasures, isn't it? Because as we have seen, the tendency of the mind is to go after the pleasures, and we have seen that the second noble truth is about tanna, which is about the tendency of the mind to run after the pleasures here and there all the time. And this is the continuous tendency of our mind to seek pleasure here and there in every object. And if we don't find that object of our senses giving us pleasure, we feel painful, isn't it? And sometimes when there is no awareness, we are stupid, we are ignorant. So you see, this particular verse number 7 is the contrast of the verse number 6, but it makes a very important point. He who lives without looking for pleasures, his senses well controlled, moderate in his food, faithful and strong. He will not be overthrown any more than the wind throws down a rocky mountain. So it's our choice whether we want to be strong like a mountain or whether we would like to be a big tree whose roots are not very deep. And when there is a sort of a wind, the mountain is unaffected by the wind. But a weak tree will be uprooted as soon as the wind blows. So you see, these two verses are actually, guide for us in our lives as to how we should live our lives. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read verse number 6 again and then verse number 7 so that the difference between the two is very clear to us. He who lives looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, immoderate in his food, idle and weak, will certainly be overthrown by his own overdoing as the wind throws down a weak tree. The verse number 7, he who lives without looking for pleasures, his senses well controlled, moderate in his food, faithful and strong, he will not be overthrown any more than the wind throws down the rocky mountain. You see, the Buddhism is all about choices. We have the choice, as Baba Ambedkar has mentioned in the earlier parts of the Buddha and Dhamma, that the Buddha's way is not that of a fatalism. It's not about fatality. It's not that everything is fixed. We have a choice every moment. And that is up to us what we do with that moment, whether we choose the path of the weakness or we choose the path of the strength. Whether we just run after the pleasures again and again, or we try to cultivate the path of the Dhamma. That choice is always available to us. And the responsibility and the onus to walk on that path lies on our own shoulders. Nobody is going to purify our minds. Nobody is going to come and transform our minds. They can give the keys to how we should walk on this path of the Dhamma. But as far as we know that the Buddha is not going to grant us the liberation. We have to seek our own liberation. We have to seek our own happiness. We have to be able to seek our own bliss. We have to be able to seek our own emancipation. So our own emancipation lies on whether we let ourselves let loose and do whatever it wants to do, and by that doing land ourselves into troubles. This is one hand. On the other hand, we can try to conquer ourselves. We can make our minds firm. We can make our minds strong like the mountains. So even if there are worldly winds, the worldly winds are blowing all the time. Somebody will praise us, somebody will blame us. Sometimes we will gain, sometimes we will lose. Sometimes we have loss, sometimes we have profits. All these winds are blowing all the time around us, all of us. So if our minds are weak, then we will be uprooted like a weak tree. But if our minds are strong like mountains, nothing will happen, isn't it? So whatever happens in the world, we stay unaffected by it. So there is a very beautiful gatha in Mahamangal Sutta, Futtassa Loka Dhammehi Chittang Yassana Kampati Asokam Virajang Khemam Etang Mahamangal Mangala Uttamam. So you see, so when our minds are touched by these worldly winds, if our minds are strong, they will not be affected by the worldly winds. So 8. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. You see, these two sentences looks like a very simple one, but if we try to dig deeper into this sentences, we can find a very beautiful teaching of the Buddha. If to himself a man is dear, we are all dear to ourselves. We love ourselves more than we love anybody else in the world. Then what we should do, if we love ourselves dear, if we are dear to ourselves, what we should do, we should keep close watch upon ourselves, isn't it? If I am dear to myself, it's my duty to keep watch on myself. But what we do, our minds are always talking about others. Our minds are always moving around. Our minds are not keeping vigils, watch on our own selves. So you see this verse number 8, if to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. 9. First establish thyself in the right, then thou may counsel others. Let not the wise man give occasion for reproach. All the time in our lives, we are trying to teach others, how they should behave. All the time in our lives, we are trying to counsel others. Isn't it? We don't leave an opportunity to act as a guide to others. But here, what the Buddha is saying, first establish thyself in the right. So first of all, our duty is to establish ourselves in the right path. And that becomes very clear to us in the verse number 8, because we find there is nobody dear to us than our own selves. We cherish our own self. So when we cherish our own self, why not we keep watch on our own selves? Why do we run after other people, trying to find faults in other people? Isn't it? All the time we are trying to pick faults in the other people. This is the tendency of our mind, to glorify ourselves and try to find the faults in others. So if we read this verse number 8 and 9 together, we get a very, very beautiful, very simplified teaching of the Buddha. Very practical as well. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. And then first establish thyself in the right, then thou may counsel others. So because we have to keep ourselves, we ourselves are dear to ourselves, then that implies that we have to keep the close watch upon ourselves. And when we keep close watch upon ourselves, we have to establish ourselves on the right path. When we are ourselves established on the right path, when our mind is unshakable like the mountain, then only we can counsel others. Then only we can talk to other people for how they should be. Isn't it? And let not the wise man give occasion for reproach. Isn't it? So we should be in a way, live in a way that the wise people should not condemn us or reproach us. Isn't it? I find this verse number 8 and 9 very interesting. And I think the more we read, the more its meaning become very practical and clear to us. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. Isn't it? Because we are dear to ourselves, it's our duty to be mindful of our own self. Why? Because we are dear to our own selves. So what we should do if we are dear to our own selves, we have to establish ourselves on the right path. Now verse number 10 goes like this. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. It's very difficult to control oneself. It's not easy to control our minds. It's not easy to control our ego. It's not easy to control our sense of self. It's very difficult. Isn't it? Because we are so much conditioned by this self. We are so much controlled by this self. We are so much taken by this self that it's very hard to control oneself. And we all know that, we make a lot of resolutions, but we fail to keep it. We try to, become a good person, but we know that a lot of times it's not easy because our selves are not easy to control. 10. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. If one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, thus well controlled, one will have control over others. This is beautiful. You see, if one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, you see, all the time we are expecting other people to do good. All the time we are telling other people to be like this. Isn't it? So what the Buddha is saying, if we can shape ourselves according to what we ask other people to be, you see, am I audible there? Sorry, there was electricity issue. Am I audible now?
Yes, Dada, you are audible. Yes, yes.
Okay. So now you see this verse number 10, oneself they say is hard to control. If one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, just one single line. You see, just one single line, if we can understand, we would have understood the very core of the Buddha's teachings. You see, if one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, all the goodness in the world we expect from others. And we think that there is nothing wrong with us. We are always trying to pick up the faults in others. We are always trying to blame others. But here the Buddha is very, very intelligent. He says that if you can shape your mind the way you want others to be, thus well-controlled one will have control over others. And that is the only way by which we can control others, by controlling ourselves, by shaping our minds according to what we expect others to be. That is the way we can control others. You see, the verse number 10 is limitless. That captures the very essence, very practical teachings of the Buddha. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. It's not easy to control oneself. If one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, thus well-controlled one will have control over others. I think it needs a lot of reflection. It needs a lot of thought through by everybody as to how we all the time are trying to counsel other people. They should be like this. They should not harm other people. They should not tell lies. They should be this and they should be that. They should be that. But if we apply the same sort of training to ourselves, the Buddha says that we, by that way, by working on your own minds, the way you would like other people to be, this is the way to control other people. 11, a man pays in himself for the evil he has done, and in himself is purified. You see, whether we cultivate evil or whether we cultivate purity, it all depends on us. It's all depends. It doesn't depend on any external agency. No fate, no God, no external conditions. Whether our minds are purified or whether our minds are, evil, it's all, done by ourselves. A man pays in himself for the evil he has done, and in evil himself is purified. The good and evil are purified severally. No one purifies another. Though one should conquer in battle thousands and thousands of men, whoso shall conquer himself, he is the greatest of the warriors. The Buddhism is always compared with the path of the warriors. If you look at the Japanese tradition or Chinese tradition, or even Indian traditions, the Buddhist practitioner is compared or likened with the warriors. And who is the warrior? One who conquers his own self is the warrior. So you see the verse number 12, though one should conquer in battle thousands and thousands of men, whoso shall conquer himself, he is the greatest of the warriors. 13, so what one should do? First establish thyself in the right, then thou may counsel others. Let not the wise man give occasion for reproach. So if you want to give counseling to others, if you want to give advice to others, the Buddha says, first you follow that advice. First establish thyself in the right. So verse number 14, if one shapes oneself according as one counsels others, thus well controlled, one will have control over others. Oneself, they say, is hard to control. This is the repetition of the verse number 10, but in a different format. But that is how we understand this verse number 10 and verse number 14 are to be read together. And then we understand the exact meaning of it. Verily, oneself is the guardian of oneself. What other guardian should there be? Guarded by oneself, one gets a guardian, the like of which is not likely gotten. So you see, if our mind is guarded, if our self is conquered, there is no other guide. There is no other guardian we need. Our own mind becomes our own guardian. We don't need extra guardian for that. If our mind is conquered, if our senses are controlled, if we can guard ourselves, that is the greatest of the guardian that we have. So we can be Lord of our own self. The Buddha says that there is no other Lord for you. The only Lord that you have is your own self. So verily oneself is the guardian of oneself. What other guardian should there be? Guarded by oneself, one gets a guardian, the like of which is not likely gotten. Verse number 16 goes like this. If to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. The repetition of the Gatha. That means we can understand the very importance, because when something is repeated, which means it is emphasized. It is so important that it needs to be repeated. 17. A man pays in himself for the evil he has done, and in himself is purified. The good and evil are purified severally. No one purifies another. Verily oneself is the guardian of oneself. What other guardian should there be? Guarded by oneself, one gets a guardian, the like of which is not easily gotten. You see, it's a very beautiful subsection of the Buddhist way of life. So we talk about the self-conquest, but the self is always in reference to other. We define ourselves in reference to other. So this interplay between the self and other has to be understood. So our focus is always on other, that the other people should be like this, they should be like that. But if we can use the same counseling that we give to others to shape our own minds, that way we can control our minds. And when we can do that, that is the short way of, it's not a good word, but to take control of other people. So I think I will stop here, and then we will continue to discuss further. So if there is anything that you want to share, comment on, reflect, please go on. But you see, this is so profoundly clear exposition, and this is the genius of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. The way he has read the Buddhist text, and the way he has given us this very beautiful teachings, which are so clear to us to understand and make sense of and practice in our own lives. So I think Sukhdevji has got something. He has raised a hand. Sukhdevji, please go on.
Thank you, Jai Bhim.
Jai Hind.
After a long time, I'm attending class. I missed lots of sessions, but this session is a very, very heart touching to me. And I got first a point that is our number 6. That is very mind blowing and forced me to think deeply. And the question arises in my mind that in current era, in situations, we people looking for pleasure. I would say the sensual pleasure.
Yes.
And later on, we realize that it's not good for me. For example, like fast food, like smoking, alcohol, and so many things. And so how can we control and this say that control ourselves on these senses in early stage, become fatty later on, or getting ill later on. So I will put this question to all of you.
Are you talking about the food in general, that we are immoderate in food, we eat junk food?
Yeah. It's current obvious like looking for pleasure.
Yes,
like
yes.
The
pleasure of tongue. The pleasure of tongue.
Yes, right. Yeah, but it's a sensual pleasure, like smoking and alcohol, and as well as lot many things.
See, I think these words, this section itself gives the answer to that, isn't it? So the verse number 8 goes like this: if to himself a man is dear, let him keep close watch upon himself. Isn't it?
Yeah.
So most of the times we don't know where our welfare lies and where our welfare does not lie, isn't it? So that means that sometimes, when we indulge into such kind of a things, we have this sense of self, which is, which we can say is idealized. Sometimes why people eat junk food, why, because there are some of the doctors in our group can tell why there is so much of craving for the food, for the junk food that we eat, isn't it? And basically, what is the food? So there are two ways in which we can look at food. One way by which we can look at food as kind of a sensory gratification, to please our tongue. And another way to look at food is as a medicine, isn't it? That we all need to eat food. We all need to eat. We all need to drink water. These are all basic conditions for life, isn't it? So likewise, I think the answer of this lies in understanding the impact of eating those kind of junk food on our own self. So it implies that whether we love ourselves fully, most of the times in today's world, we are taught not to love ourselves.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Isn't it? So if we can develop this sense of maitri to ourselves, if we can develop the sense of dearness to oneself, then we know the right path.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So there is no easy answer to that, because there is a world of advertisement.
Sorry to interrupt.
Please.
But it is not anywhere a curriculum or in parenting also not taught children and the student to love yourself or guide yourself.
That's true.
And when there is a time pass, when it duration, then the student or man realize that we should love ourselves and maintain our body and the mind health properly for this
Very true. Very true. You see, our self, whatever we call ourself, is all the time controlled by the all at the time mercy of the other external factors. But it is up to us to decide. So, for example, if we look at the television, there are advertisements. There are so many things about food. If we go in the market, supermarket, for example, there are food courts which are always trying to draw our attention out, isn't it? With beautiful photographs, with smell and whatnot. So I think the word out there is trying to drag our own senses out. So what the Buddha is saying that, can we take hold of your own self? And it's not easy, as I said. It needs a lot of training. It needs a lot of cultural awakening. It needs a lot of, societal efforts.
Definitely.
Isn't it?
And the last sentence I would say that it's a great opportunity to observe our mind and our ourselves.
Yes.
In this situation and see what is happening with me. Yes. And there's what is you should. It is said in today's session that control ourselves, our senses, our mind. So it's a great opportunity to observe closely.
Yes.
And
thank you. Thank you so much, Nani. Very well said.
Yeah, this Rahul Borde here.
Yes, Rahul.
In the Suyuktar Nikara 4.1, there is a Kama Sutta, and in English it is translated as sensual desire.
Yes.
Similar discussion is there, and I remember that Buddha said that if you admit any one of this sensual desire, so it will be like the hole in the ship. So you won't immediately notice that one, but gradually water will be in and the ship will be sink. 4.1 Kama Sutta.
It's called Kamatanna because all the time our mind is running after the sensual pleasures all the time.
Yep.
And it's said that it's like drinking the sea water to quench our thirst. So the more salty water you drink, your tanna increases. So basically, what the Buddha is asking us not to let our mind run after the external stimuli all the time. It's asking Buddha is asking us to calm our mind, settle our mind, so that we can look at our minds. And as the Buddha says that only our minds can liberate ourselves. Only our minds can enslave ourselves. We are not enslaved by the external things. We are enslaved by our own minds. And all the time, it's in the capacity of the mind to free itself. If the mind wants to be free, the mind can be freed. If there is a will, towards awakening, if there is a will towards enlightenment. And I think there is a whole point about the tendency of the mind to run after sensual pleasures all the time. It's like the tendency of the mind is to just take hold of the objects. The tendency of our mind is to take hold of the objects all the time. So our mind is defined in the Buddhist technical terms as something that holds onto the object. Now imagine that our mind is not taking hold of the objects all the time. It's free from that holding. It's detached. The mind is completely detached from the sensory world. The mind which is unified, the mind which is completely integrated, that is the mind of the Buddha. The mind which is totally detached from the sense objects, the mind that is totally detached from the foolish ideas, stupid ideas, the mind which is sublime, the mind which is pure, the mind which is strong is the mind of the Buddha. So I think the point here is very clear that the sensuality is a big problem. The Buddha says that we cannot avoid the sensual world. But what the Buddha is saying, that we can have moderation in the sensual world also. Isn't it? For example, food. We cannot do without food. We have to eat food. But if we are excessively taken over by our tongue, then we are going to suffer. If we are excessively taken over by our sense of eyes, by our sense of ears, by our sense of taste, by smell, then our minds are like, uncontrolled. And when the minds are uncontrolled, sensually uncontrolled, that mind cannot be guarded. And the mind that cannot be guarded is going to create a lot of troubles for us. And we know that. Is that what you mean, Rahul Bhai? I think Rahul Bhai has a connection issues. Samiksha has raised hands. Samiksha, please go ahead.
Yes, Jevin, sir.
Yeah, Vim.
Sir, I had this question, like through this study, I have understood that this desire, cravings give rise to eventually sufferings, right? So I was thinking, like, if there is desire, no craving, how we will progress? Wouldn't the world would be at standstill? Or like, I was not getting answer to this question, sir. So it would be nice if you put some light on this.
Right. There are like this positive desires and the negative desires. So for example, the desire to awaken, or the desire to be good is welcome, because there is like what he said, Rahul was saying about the kama chanda. So there is, of course, the indulgence of mind in the sensual world. But as the Buddha said, that there is another chanda, that is Dhamma chanda, the mind that is running after the truth, the mind that is running after the Dhamma. So you see, we have the choices to be good or bad, isn't it? To pursue the negative desire or to pursue the positive desire. For example, the intention to benefit other people, isn't it? The desire to benefit other people is not wrong, isn't it? But whatever desire we have, when we act upon some desire, can we be detached from it? So if we are trying to do good to the world, but cherishing the ego that I am doing good to the world, then it's a negative desire. But if we are trying to cultivate the desire to do good to the world so that we ourselves can be freed from the desires, then that's a positive desire. So you see, these words we have to be, we have to understand very, very clearly, and we have to know. For example, one of the meanings of the word bodhisattva is bodhisattva, means somebody who is intent on attaining bodhi. And that kind of a desire, that kind of a will is not wrong, because this samyak sankalpa, the second organ of the noble eightfold path, is all about desire to cultivate the positive mental states, right resolve, isn't it? So there is a realm of desire, sensual desire, which we should be clear about, and we should watch our minds off. That we know that if we excessively indulge into the sensual desires, it definitely blunts our minds. It makes our mind stupid, and it doesn't let our mind be free, because we are so heavy following these sensual desires. But if our minds have to be light and go fast towards awakening, we have to leave aside a lot of these desires. And when we do that, we pursue the desire to become the Buddha, or to desire to become a good man or a good human being or a good woman, isn't it? So these desires are not wrong. The Dhamma Chanda is not wrong. To be intent on Bodhi is not wrong, isn't it? So we have to understand what we desire, isn't it? What we crave for. That is very important. Are we just craving for my own personal pleasure? Am I just craving for, gladdening my mind? Isn't it? And one thing I would like to tell you is, the Buddha has experienced pleasure which is not dependent on senses. So the pleasure that we seek in the sensory words, the Buddha, when he was meditating beneath the Bodhi tree, and when his body was frail and weak, by practicing the hardcore asceticism, the Buddha realized the anapanasati that he practiced when he was a child in his father's farm, and then he thought that this might be the sure path to the Nibbana. And he realized that we can have this bliss and happiness and even pleasure which is not dependent on senses. So the mind which is concentrated, the mind which is full of love, is having this very beautiful bliss. There is a happiness in that mind. There is a pleasure in that mind, which is independent of the senses. You see, so even without indulging into the senses, we can all experience the sublime pleasure. So you see, the word desire has two connotations. One, either you are cultivating the sensory desires, or do you have the desire for something higher? Is your mind tuned to the path of the Dhamma? Is your mind is indulging into the Dhamma? I think that's where we can talk about the two desires. Is that okay, Samiksha?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have another 5 minutes to go. Anyone has anything to say or comment, or anything to reflect on, please go on.
Yeah, very well said regarding the desires. I think this is a terminal effect, actually, the desire. Actually, what is the relation? What actually to say in Pali? So actually, desire means you can say wish, but in the Samyak Sankalpa, in the point of view of Samyak Sankalpa, anything which, or any desire, it lead us to the greed, hatred, and delusion that we should avoid. And any desire that is pulling us from greed, hatred, and delusion, so that will be helpful for the mankind. That is useful. Just adding to that comment.
Nicely said, Rahul bhai. Nicely said. Anything else? If there is nothing from anyone to comment on or reflect upon, then we will stop here, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Mangesh bhai. Okay.
Pankaj bhai, you want to say something?
No, okay. I was just saying it's very clear and transparent session. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
No, I think what in the end I would recommend all of us is to read the Buddha and his Dhamma time and again. And there are a lot of things in the Buddha and his Dhamma that needs a lot of reflection. Like this particular point that we are always trying to counsel others. We are always trying to see other people in the ideal terms. We want them to be practicing the Panchashil. We want other people, we encourage other people to do that. But what about us? So whatever we are trying to tell others, if we can put that very thing into practice, then our minds are purified and controlled. And the second aspect of it is this, that that's how you can take we can control others, isn't it? We cannot control others by just giving them the lip service. We have to practice what we teach, what we ask other people to be. And I think that's very beautiful. So if we want to cherish yourself vis-a-vis others, we have to, we expect other people to be the best. And that's what we always try to tell them. So whatever we are trying to tell other people, if we can, we can turn that back onto ourselves, and we change ourselves according to that, then I think that's the surest way to, purify our minds. And I think that's very beautifully put here in this section. So thank you so much for joining, all of you, and see you in the next class.
Thank you, Mangesh bhai. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.